Morning. I am tremendously delighted and honored to be joined once again by Jake Broe. And it seems especially pertinent because I'm here in DC with a fantastic group of people talking about leadership, talking about community, talking about energy resilience. We're discussing some amazing topics. While we're doing this, we have Trump and his geopolitics unfolding, his clear alignment with the Kremlin, and we have Ukraine being bombed day and night, day in, day out. So I won't sort of dwell on this too much. It won't be a long intro. Just a quick one to point out to people: we do have a campaign to crowdsource a truck for the 69th Sniffing Brigade. Do check out the link in the description of this video. And of course, I'm immensely grateful as always to everyone who supports the channel through Patreon, Buy Me Coffee, and of course, who likes, subscribes, and adds comments. Right, that's enough of the intros. Jake, welcome.
Hey, Jonathan, thanks for having me back on the channel.
Always a privilege, and these conversations are always stimulating for me. But I think even more importantly, the audience always finds them stimulating. And we are talking at an absolute inflection point, a pivotal point. It seems to me, at least, that what has been Trump's clear alignment with the Kremlin, we've been on a bit of a roller coaster. At times, that has sort of gone underground, or it's transmuted, or the tone has changed. And the media, of course, chases those change in tone like a sort of, dog after a bone. But now it seems to me that the real clear policy is coming through. And that clear policy is alignment with the Kremlin, betrayal of Ukraine, and the absolute betrayal and humiliation of allies as well. Am I putting this in too extreme a fashion, or what's your take on it?
President Trump 2.0, he came back into office and he wants to make it clear to everybody in the world he doesn't care about democracy, he doesn't care about human rights. All of the nonsense that the United States has been pushing on the world, human rights, democracy, since the end of World War II, America is done with that. All we care about is money. Trade deals, we'll do business with terrorist groups. We'll do business with anyone, as long as Trump thinks it benefits himself, his family, or America. I personally don't like living in this America where we don't have values. We don't care about people suffering in the world. But Trump is desperate to maintain this relationship with the Russians and Putin because he views the Russians as a strong, powerful, wealthy nation, when in reality they're not, but that is the perception that Trump has. Trump has fond memories of the Russians going all the way back to his Atlantic City days when he opened up all these casinos that eventually went bankrupt. But they were always stocked with Russians. For 40 years, Trump and the Russians have had this odd relationship, this camaraderie. I think they're ideological kin, how they see and want to impose themselves on the world. So this doesn't align with the national security apparatus of the United States. Our natural allies are the G7 and NATO countries. And all G7 and NATO leaders have been meeting with Trump one after another saying, you got to do something about Russia. They're going to keep killing people. These wars are never going to end. Putin is going for empire. If Putin succeeds in Ukraine, Moldova won't last very long. The Baltics are next. Putin is going to continue redrawing the maps and claiming this territory once belonged to Russia, it should belong to Russia again. This is the official state narrative. Last month, Putin declared anywhere that a Russian soldier has set foot, anywhere in history, today that territory rightfully belongs to Russia. So unless we want to make these wars stop, unless Trump wants to always be asked questions, why aren't you doing anything to stop the killing? 3 years from now, 4 years from now, whatever. We have to do something today. And the only thing we can do is overwhelming strength, overwhelming force, increase sanctions, giving Ukraine the support they need to make the Russians stop on the battlefield.
And we should point out that Russian boots not only have been in the Baltics, Poland, Romania, Moldova, the whole list of countries. Russian boots have also been in Berlin. They've also been in Paris after the Napoleonic armies were kicked out. Now, our historical memories tend to not really go back that far, or to have a kind of mythologized history going back to that period. We tend to look a little bit, well, we used to look forward, but Russians hark back to this. So when they talk about Russian boots being on European territory, they literally mean all the way to Paris. Is this something that, I mean, Does Trump realize this? Does he care? Do European leaders even realize the depth, the toxicity of this Russian imperial dream?
Well, Russia has never really changed. The experiment with communism, it failed. And Putin is saying the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical disaster of the 20th century. He's trying to undo that. He genuinely believes that Moscow should be the seat of power for the entire European continent. Whether Russia directly controls these countries or indirectly controls their leaders through business deals or stationing troops somewhere, I don't know. This is a project that's going to span decades. If the Russians succeed in Ukraine today, then they've already destroyed the international rules-based order. They have proven the UN Charter to be meaningless, and they can just invade their neighbors. Might is right. If you have the strength, you can take whatever you want from anybody. That's not a world I want to live in because this gives ideas to China. This gives ideas to other authoritarian leaders that the international rules-based order doesn't exist anymore. If I just invade my smaller neighbor and kill them, then I get to have their stuff. That seems like a really good deal to every dictator. It's the same it's the same cycle repeating, and we used to call it the age of empires. And it wasn't very fun being a commoner living in an empire where these ruling elites, these dynastic families all interbreeding with each other, were constantly just killing and fighting each other. But it wasn't them, it wasn't their kids. You used to be safe in your European capitals, sending your troops to die, conscripting farmers, and then having them march across the border. You can't really do that with ICBMs and nuclear weapons anymore, but Putin wants to try, and Donald Trump also wants to play along. Donald Trump also has this worldview and mindset of we are big, we are strong, we should be able to just take whatever we want that we think best serves us and our people. This is why Trump talks about seizing Panama and Greenland and Canada. They don't believe these countries are sovereign. They don't believe they have the right to self-determination. The big players, the large countries, the people with the most nukes, are the only ones who have a say in anything that happens in the world. So this meeting that Trump wants, this is about the only people who matter, Putin and Trump, having a discussion, coming to an agreement, shaking hands, and then moving nations to their will. I don't want to be acted upon. I don't like this. I think the president of the United States should be a servant to the people, not ruling the people and dictating the outcome of other nations.
Of course, there's three seats missing at this Yalta of tyrants, which is taking place or being planned. One seat, of course, is the European Union, and by extension, Britain. With that, it seems that they are purposefully trying to exclude Europe from that discussion because they know that much of what is going to be proposed by way of concessions to Russia will be unacceptable to Europe. They're trying to exclude Ukraine from decisions about its sovereign territory. I mean, we should really focus on that. But they're excluding China. It seems to me this war will not end unless China is at the table, because China is now one of the not only the main financial or military backers of Russia, helping to prop up the Russian regime through purchases of oil, components, military supplies, etc., but if we look at the deep strategic current of why Russia is fighting, well, China has skin in this game too. I mean, what's your take on that? And why is this argument not cutting through? Because what Trump administration and Biden actually had in common is seeing China as a peer adversary. So it's odd to preclude them from this discussion.
It's not odd if you don't view them as relevant, which Putin and Trump both view the governments and leaders of Ukraine, the United Kingdom, and the European Union as all being irrelevant. Who has the most nukes? That's the only way these two men think. So there's no ceasefire. There's no peace deal that Putin would accept unless all frozen assets are returned and all sanctions are lifted. And that can't happen without Kyiv, Brussels, and London. But this is an easier outcome for Putin. If I can just manipulate Trump and get him to agree to something, then Trump will just go ballistic on the Europeans and start threatening sanctions and tariffs and cutting this off or halting these deliveries to force Brussels to reconnect Russia's banks to the SWIFT network. Like that's how Putin and Trump see this, that these are all minor, weak, irrelevant people that will eventually bend to our will as soon as we apply pressure on them. I hate this. As an American, this is reviled. This is disgusting. To all my friends living in these other democratic countries around the world, I'm including Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Japan, South Korea. This is the new world we have woken up in as soon as Donald Trump was brought back into office. Here in America, we're trying to resist him, we're trying to fight him, but in this new global age of digital media and the breakdown of truth, the breakdown of legacy, the irrelevance of journalists, influencers now dominate what people think and feel online. I'm one of them. I don't know how I got in this position, but I'm taking my position very serious and I'm trying to be as active as possible, making myself available, Jonathan, to try and avert our country from this dystopian nightmare future. It's basically George Orwell's 1984 come to life. The three superpowers of Oceania, Eurasia, and East Asia. This is the United States, a new revitalized Russian empire that dominates the European continent, probably also the Middle East and Africa someday, and then East Asia, with China already over 1 billion people dominating their region and partners as well. This scenario, the rest of this century, will just be continuous warfare, isolated hot zones, disputes over resources and territory or whatever, and the big three will just balance each other out. East Asia and your East Asia was always our enemy, and Eurasia was always our ally. That was the words of George Orwell's 1984 until one of the three got too big, and then they'd flip on each other. It's always the two ganging up on the one if they become too powerful, but it's just continuous warfare, continuous death, continuous fighting. No nation has sovereignty. I'm trying to avoid this, Jonathan, but
Yeah.
this meeting between Putin and Trump in Alaska, this is what they want. This is what they've been working towards for years. I mean, this has been Putin's dream for a decade, getting Trump into office, getting Russian agents in his inner circle to promote this narrative of nations don't have sovereignty, the UN Charter is worthless. Let's start redrawing the maps and create super empires. And the United States can basically be, the king, the regional hegemon in North America and all of its resources, Canada's oil and gas, Canada's mineral deposits, Canada's fresh water. Same thing with Greenland.
And I think people haven't quite woken up fully. And I know you have, and it's curious that it's a number of commentators in the YouTube space, not necessarily as many people in the mainstream media. I think it's curious that that's kind of happening. But I don't think people have woken up to the full implications of this. And that is that it's not just that you have big countries and you have insignificant countries. You have sovereign countries, which are the empires you've talked about, and you have all the others. If you can't defend your borders, then you essentially have no borders. You're there to be plundered. But this also moves away from any idea of universal human rights, not just democracy, but all the fundamental rights that have been formed and shaped and evolved really since 18th century and then baked in through multiple revolutions, through multiple independence struggles over the last couple of centuries. This seeks to erase and reverse all of those things. Um, I don't think people have realized how terrifying it is, and the fact that your comparison there to Orwell, a boot stamping on a human face forever. This is what we're facing. This is the slide into an extremely dark and dystopian future, one which Putin absolutely dreams about creating.
Human rights don't exist in China. Free speech doesn't exist in China, and you never hear MAGA criticizing the lack of free speech in China. Human rights do not exist in Russia. Free speech does not exist in Russia, and you will never hear MAGA complaining about the lack of free speech in Russia. MAGA only speaks up about defending free speech whenever Russian and Chinese propaganda is trying to be restricted by democracies. And here in the United States, it's every day. Trump just breaks a new barrier, a new political norm to restrict the freedoms of Americans. He is interfering in corporate. He just called for the CEO of Intel to resign. He is trying to merge American publicly traded companies with the government. This is a government takeover of our corporations when he has CEO Tim Cook of Apple coming to the White House to bend the knee, to present him with a
And
24 karat gold disc to try and not have tariffs be placed on India.
that was
Trump is
grotesque. That was extraordinary, wasn't it?
Trump is loving this. He is loving making these publicly traded companies bend to his will. All of these companies like Paramount settling, like the CBS lawsuit, or Trump is now suing Rupert Murdoch of the Wall Street Journal for $10 billion. And we're just breaking through barrier after barrier with judges backing down, governors backing down, state and local politicians backing down. I do want to just say to the audience, I am optimistic in that I think these people are idiots and they're incompetent and they're not pulling it off, but they're trying. This is where they want to go. If Trump can become sovereign and supreme, the permanent dictator of the United States, we're not going to have free and fair elections. You're not going to have free speech. Nobody is allowed to criticize the king. We got to find a way, Jonathan. Everyone needs to wake up. Everyone needs to resist, especially if you're American. We're heading towards a very dangerous world in which a lot of people are going to die if we don't restore the international rules-based order that has kept the peace on the planet, has kept another world war from breaking out the last 80 years.
That is one of the extraordinary things, isn't it? When there's a disinformation talks about, there's one particular theory that this war is happening because all these weapons were kind of lying around, and it's an almost inevitable result of having, strength through being armed inevitably leads to wars. When in fact, the Cold War shows the opposite, that a well-armed peace, a well-armed and determined democracy with values actually prevents direct conflict. So there are a whole bunch of lessons we need to relearn about effective strength, effective deterrence, about belief in core fundamental values and principles. And I think this is the other side of the struggle that we're engaged with here. It's an educational struggle. It's a struggle to revitalize democracy itself.
It was easy. It was easy for Americans and the Western alliance to be united against the Russians during the Cold War because they were atheists. Stalin destroyed churches. So all you had to do was tell your people the Russians don't, they're godless people who don't support Christianity and they want to destroy religion. So let's gang up on them. In addition, the Russians were communists and they abolished private property. So if you wanted to protect private property, if you wanted to protect free enterprise, you had to be in opposition to the Russians. So the brilliance of Putin, a KGB lieutenant colonel, seeing his empire collapse in 1991, the dude was only out of power for 7 years. It took 7 years for him to get into the role of prime minister, and then Yeltsin gave him the keys to the kingdom. And he said, all right, we're going to get our empire back. And we're not going to be oppressive towards Christians. People around the world don't like it when you suppress their religion. And we're going to create a new form of capitalism. This is KGB capitalism, where the state controls industries. And Putin then spent his first term in office systematically eliminating the heads of all of these private Russian companies, these private Russian banks, these private Russian industries. And he more or less nationalized them. Yes, they're publicly traded. Anybody can buy and sell shares, and you feel like you're participating in a free enterprise, but you're not. The CEOs of all these companies are only there because Putin put them there, meaning they're loyal to the Kremlin. And most of the time, the Kremlin probably doesn't interfere or tell them what to do. If you're a canned good maker for a Russian company, unless the military needs something, the Kremlin's probably not going to bother you. But for the state oil industry, for the defense companies, for the gold miners, for the shipping companies, even the airlines, you do what the Kremlin says. And that's
And
not
that's
what's supposed to
changed
happen
now. Yeah.
in a free
That's
society.
changed big time in the war economy. The interference is much greater. And in fact, they're starting to hand these businesses over to loyalists. They're taking them off the businessmen who knew how to run them. And it's descending into a kind of feudalism, bandit feudalism, where you take these resources and give them to scum and warlords who then asset strip the businesses. But to your point there as well, people will say, well, hang on a second, that sounds a bit ominous. It's far worse because in every HR department of every major company since the early 2000s, people find this difficult to believe, they would have had FSB agents openly planted in the HR departments to find compromat on staff to make sure they weren't politically active against the regime. So the mechanisms of repression go all the way back to the start of Putin's regime, and I think this is barely realized even by Russians themselves, and certainly not really realized by foreigners. I had dealings with one of the largest software companies whose core teams were based in Russia, and whenever they came to a foreign, trade exhibition or something, they had a KGB stooge to spy on their own staff if they were going abroad. People find this hard to believe, but this was in 2020.
This is what's happening in the United States as well. As part of approving this merger between Paramount and Skydance, because like the FCC is controlled by Trump, he then gets to approve or reject companies buying other companies, or this is all supposed to be independent, but Trump doesn't view anything should be independent. He views himself as a dictator. But we now have somebody overseeing CBS. This is a Trump loyalist who is going to have final say over all editorial content for what is it, 60 Minutes? That's the flagship news program of CBS. And they got Colbert canceled. This is the #1 rated show in late night. Colbert gets more views than Jimmy Fallon or Jimmy Kimmel on NBC and ABC.
And Jon
And Trump said,
Stewart,
I,
he was getting bigger audiences than the Daily Show, and
well, I mean, Daily Show is basic cable, but
yeah.
yes, Colbert was the #1. And there was no negotiation. Like if the show was losing money, then you could say to Colbert, "Can we renegotiate your contract? You get paid less, or maybe you're going to have to shrink your staff." Colbert said that he has 200 employees working on the Late Show. Can you still make a 60-minute program every night with 100 employees? Like there was no negotiation. They just cut them. They just canceled their flagship Late Show of over 3 decades because that's what Trump wanted. And this is what MAGA wants. They want to destroy corporate and legacy media, people with editors, people with gatekeepers, people with maybe executives who have ethics and morals and who act independent. And they want to push everybody online where they have rigged the platforms, they have rigged the algorithms, and they have already pre-placed their influencers, people like Charlie Cook and Candace Owens, and it's a cult. And they control the influencers, they control the people. This is the new reality we live in, and we're trying to figure it out as we bumble through it.
And unfortunately, both Putin and Trump are not wrong in some of their assumptions. So whereas Putin has been shown to be epically incompetent when it comes to sort of battlefield management and strategy, he's hopeless at war, but he's very good at lying, very good at disinformation. Both Trump and Putin have been proved right in that they know that people are going to obey in advance, as Timothy Schneider says, that CEOs are going to bow down, that the tech bros were going to sort of pay their fealty almost immediately, that the media, as you say, was going to distort and corrupt itself rather than uniting against, this authoritarian influence. Putin realized this in the early 2000s when 90% of liberal journalists decided to stick with the system and not go into opposition when that same process was going on there. So unfortunately, these two characters kind of understand human frailty and weakness, and they understand the weakness of the system and the fact they will bend most people will towards themselves. This is truly scary. How do we get out of this, Jake? How do we start to get people to rally and trust and cooperate and not obey in advance?
Well, you and I are the resistance. People watching this podcast, we're the resistance. We're currently losing, Jonathan. I don't want to be alarmist, but I'm just letting people know if you want to hold on to democracy, if you want to say in your government, if you want fair and ethical practices in business, if you want to keep your freedoms, time is now to wake up and resist. So what needs to happen as an American here in the United States, because we're the largest democracy if you don't count India, we're supposed to be the leader of the Western coalition. The Democrats need to just start replacing people. Here in the United States, we have the primary system, and this is what MAGA did going back to 2010 with the Tea Party. Trumpism began in 2010 with the Tea Party, where they said, we're just going to start primarying anybody who compromises. We're just going to start primarying anybody who wants to work with the other side to get things done. We only want firebrands. We only want fire starters, people who will say no to everything and lie about anything and be the champions of our conspiratorial causes. We're going to destroy the deep state, expose the billionaire pedophiles who have been sex trafficking children, and we're going to take down the evil government. And Trump saw this energy, he saw this movement, and he exploited it. And he had no intention of ever draining the swamp. He just wants to be king of the swamp. He wants a bigger, beautiful swamp that has, the Trump sign, Trump logo when you enter the swamp. Same thing with. It's hard, Jonathan, because there are a lot of genuinely good people who have been swept up in MAGA because they want to believe it. They want to believe that Donald Trump is this outsider and that this global cabal of lizard people have been oppressing us and keeping us down. But I just want to ask people, where's the results? We went through his first term, but okay, he was being held back by the deep state, people like Paul Ryan and Reince Priebus. But let's fast forward to the last 7 months. When you look at the text of the actual big, beautiful bill, it's just tax cuts for the rich. It's just more centralized control and authority for the American government under Donald Trump. And the culture wars haven't gotten any better. They're just getting worse. He only is able to get people to vote against their own economic best interests by pushing the culture wars. Prime example from the last week, Jonathan. I don't know if you've seen it, but these Sydney Sweeney American jeans ads.
I saw that. I had no idea what was going on.
But here's the thing: is I don't know any liberal commentators. I don't know anybody on the left who is outraged by a jeans commercial. People are outraged by the White House removing the writs of habeas corpus from the U.S. Constitution on their website. Donald Trump wants to just disappear people into vans. ICE agents wearing masks, refusing to identify themselves, picking up people off the streets and disappearing them to a gulag in El Salvador. That's what people on the left are upset about. Not a Sydney Sweeney jeans commercial, but it's just everywhere. Every right-wing influencer pushed this story as if there was this imaginary outrage from the left when it's not real. So they need the culture wars. They need something to talk about. They need somebody to attack. So your point of how do we get out of this? And we need the left to start fighting like the right does. We need Democrats willing to not play nice, stop following the rules. You have to, the expression fight fire with fire doesn't make any sense. Let's fight wire with water. Let's find a water cannon and try and put this fire out. And we're not going to listen to the arsonists saying, "Oh, don't put the fire out. That fire is benefiting a lot of people." We can use different analogies. It's all pretty stupid, but I do think a counter-revolution is coming. I do think once we get closer to the 2026 midterms, we're going to see some new personalities, some new people, some new stars, and they've got to use common language that ordinary people can understand. And they have to be relentless. They have to go everywhere on social media. Every podcast you can get on, you have to get on. You have to fight. That is something that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and even Barack Obama were never willing to do, and they're still not willing to do. The idea that our elected political leaders are supposed to be just competent managers of the federal bureaucracy, those days are gone. We need strong personalities. And we need ethical people. We need smart, intelligent, vicious, relentless people who will fight for our democracies, who will fight for human rights, who can actually stand up to Trump, MAGA, and his toadies. This movement's going to come. It has
Bernie
to.
Sanders, the kind of fire and passion of someone like Bernie Sanders. I'm not saying the exact policies, but you need people with real
Well, there
focus.
was a recent poll. I forget the polling, but they looked at the approval rating of all these different people. Trump has like a net negative 32. JD Vance has like a net negative 30 or something. The most popular person in the Trump administration is actually RFK Jr., but his net approval is still negative. But Bernie Sanders has like a plus 16 approval rating, and he's a socialist. Like, this is supposed to be the antithesis of MAGA, and it's supposed to be the fear of the Democratic base or the Democratic establishment. So how does Bernie have such a positive opinion when he arguably, I don't think they're that radical, but for the American political scene today, yes, he has radical ideas, yet he's popular. And it's because he's willing to go anywhere. He's willing to talk to anyone. He has his own unique personality and style that doesn't appeal to all, but you can still show him respect for showing up, having the dialogue, being authentic, and fighting for what he believes in. This is what the American people are craving from Democratic leaders, and it just doesn't exist with the current cast of characters. People have to be primaried, they have to be removed, and then we need competent, likable people to argue that maybe cutting, meals on wheels for starving elderly people is evil. And we should have free school lunches and SNAP benefits for people experiencing hunger in America. These are winning ideas that I think people want to support. We just got terrible people representing the left who don't make the good arguments.
And cut cancer research on the one hand and build an enormous gilded ballroom on the other. I mean, the contrast can't be starker. Talking of fighting now, we should turn back to Ukraine because we've got this supposed summit happening in Alaska. I think you and I are on the same page in that we think this is, this is more noise rather than signal. This is political theater. This is a sort of transactional, extractive, extortionate process, which actually Ukraine will not agree to, and Europe probably not as well. The question here is, should Ukraine fight on? Is their best option at this point to carry on fighting? Because they have certain weaknesses, but they also have certain distinct advantages at this point in the military struggle.
You're asking a question in which there is no alternative. Russia's not giving Ukraine a choice. There was this new Gallup poll saying that 70% of Ukrainians don't believe the fighting will stop over the next 12 months. And 70% almost of Ukrainians believe there should be a negotiated settlement as soon as possible. Now, that doesn't mean capitulation, that doesn't mean surrendering. But if Russia made some kind of reasonable deal in which there were security guarantees for Ukraine and then a freeze in the conflict along the current front lines, maybe Zelensky would agree to it. But that's not what the Russians are offering. The Russians are saying, give us Sloviansk, give us Kramatorsk, give us Konstantinivka, Pokrovsk. These are all cities that are either 60,000 or 140,000 people. Allow us to go back across the Dnipro River, retake the city of Kherson, pre-war population 300,000. Give us the city of Zaporizhia, 700,000 people. This is larger than my hometown in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. No Democratic leader would ever agree to surrendering a city larger than Milwaukee, Wisconsin. In addition, Ukrainians would be forced to give up all their defensive fortification, all the defense lines they've built over the last 3.5 years. And then this would put the Russians in artillery striking distance of the city of Dnipro, more than 1 million souls. This would also put the Russians within artillery range of the city of Mykolaiv, a city of 500,000 people. I understand
It's a
someone who knows
non-starter. It's a
for people
non-starter.
for the casual Trump supporter who knows nothing about the war, nothing about the current battlefield and front lines, they think this is great. Let's just give up some territory and then Russia will stop. Except Russia has never said they'll stop. This
No.
is to get a ceasefire. And Putin has broken every ceasefire he's ever agreed to. So why would he adhere to this one? There's no
This word
security guarantees,
swap.
which is the language we were using 3 or 4 months ago,
No.
but we're just on a hamster wheel
Yeah.
going in the same direction because Trump refuses to get off.
And the word they've introduced, swap, right? It sounds so easy, right? You've got killing and murder on this, and then there's this little thing called a swap, and it'll all go away and it'll all be beautiful.
So,
Any Ukrainian
Jonathan,
who understands this will know that peace isn't peace, occupation isn't peace, and a swap is genocide by another name.
Jonathan, you've been busy this morning. I don't know if you saw the news, but right before I got on this podcast, I was reading, I think this is Michael Weiss with the Financial Times, but apparently when Steve Witkoff went to Moscow, he misunderstood Putin. Putin offered, give me all of Donetsk, just Donetsk, and then I'll agree to a ceasefire. So Putin is trying to get something he doesn't currently have. And somehow Witkoff misinterpreted this, saying the Russians will give back the region of Kherson and the region of Zaporizhia. This would include, I think, Berdansk and like Melitopol. And then if Ukraine gives this territory in Donetsk, we'll have a ceasefire. But the Russians have never agreed to this. That's not what the Russians said. But Witkoff is so stupid. He went to D.C. and told Trump this. And this is what got Trump so excited. And then Trump announced this meeting in Alaska. And I want to say, Jonathan, I haven't seen the Kremlin confirm that Putin is actually willing to fly to Alaska. So I don't believe it's actually happening until the. This is the one instance where you can believe the Kremlin when they say something. But this is amateur hour. Steve Witkoff is not a skilled diplomat. Steve Witkoff is a bumbling idiot. This should have been Marco Rubio or somebody more competent going to the Kremlin to have this meeting. But Trump loves living in this gray area. He loves when there's mass confusion because he thinks he can then just declare something and then impose this on people, and they'll feel so awkward that this isn't what actually is happening. They won't have the will to resist and they'll go along. So I actually think this is what Trump might actually be trying to do. Like, he deliberately is misinterpreting what the Kremlin offered to then try and trick the Russians into giving up the land bridge to Crimea. Like, the whole point of this war, one of the primary objectives was to have a land bridge to Crimea and to secure the fresh water from the Dnipro River. So no, I don't see the Russians ever giving up Kherson and Zaporizhia in exchange for Donetsk when Ukraine would never agree to that anyways. This is not a real peace summit potentially happening in Alaska next Friday. This is a clown show, and it's going to be a diplomatic disaster for everyone involved.
And yet the media immediately jump on the words. It seems that our core media that we have now are all about the signal. No, they're all about the noise and not about the signal. And what Trump is able to do is to create this incessant curtain of fire hose of noise, which just keeps the media running in all sorts of directions with almost no ability to stop and think strategically about what this stuff means. I have had people reaching out to me who are very well informed, asking, oh, what's going to happen here? Is this a genuine process? Are we going to see peace? Like literally forgetting all the conversations we've had, all the videos I've produced, where we explain over and over that Putin will not give up his ambitions. He cannot give up the idea of sitting in the opera house in Odessa, where I was just a couple of weeks ago. He cannot give up the idea of getting to the border of Transnistria. He cannot give up war itself because he's retooled his regime, his media sphere, his economy, his education system. Everything is tooled to militarization and war. And people just, they listen, and then they forget, and they immediately revert to trying to, well, believe in fantasies.
Ukraine was step one to get the empire back. Ukraine was supposed to be the easy one, a 3-day special military operation. Zelensky was supposed to accept that offer of a helicopter ride out of Kyiv. But President Zelensky, the leader of his nation, said, no, I don't want a ride. I want ammunition. We're going to fight. That's how this all started 3.5 years. And the Russians screwed up. They did not actually prepare for a real war. They sent in 200,000 soldiers thinking that they could conquer a nation of 40 million people. And they've just continued to embarrass themselves. Operation Spiderweb, they just lost a third of their strategic bombers. They can't replace these planes. They don't have the assembly lines. Aeroflot has completely collapsed. Hackers destroyed their IT infrastructure. They're still manually organizing the crews and sending out the flights, but the Russians are so pathetic. They were begging the Ethiopians to help them. They wanted to do a wet lease to have their planes, their crews, their insurance to operate domestic flights inside of Russia. That's how pathetic the Russians currently are. They're begging the Ethiopians to handle their domestic air travel.
Only a figure like Trump could look at Russia and see strength.
Strength.
And that's the
Yeah.
unfortunate point here. Where do we go from here? You've just done an incredibly successful fundraiser, once again, to buy these incredible vehicles that are essential for protecting life, saving life, getting equipment to the front. Um, your advice to all of us in this pro-Ukraine space, is it that we just carry on doing that? We carry on sourcing funds for Ukraine to keep it resilient, to keep it fighting back, and we should just carry on because there is no end in sight until Putin collapses and his regime collapses.
The United States for the next 3.5 years is useless. We're useless to NATO, useless to the G7 and the Western coalition. Uh, I mean, being useless, honestly, under Trump is the best case scenario because Trump can always support Russia, send weapons to Russia, or apply sanctions and tariffs on Ukraine and European countries to force them to cut off military aid to Ukraine. So at this point, we just have to settle. We just have to say the United States is neutral, and anything that the United States does is a benefit. If Trump is willing to sell weapons, if the United States military supplies intelligence, if someone wants to negotiate or help from America, great. But for Ukraine and the European Union and the UK, you guys are on your own. Now, the good news is the Russians, I don't think they have another 2 years in them. I think they're going to go to this winter. They're going to. Where was the big summer offensive? We got these headlines for the last 4 or 5 months of 60,000 troops in Sumy, 80,000 troops in Sumy, 120,000 troops in Sumy, 30,000 North Korean troops are coming in. They're going to punch across the border and create a new front.
None of that happened. They got
Well, they tried.
decimated, but they
They
tried.
they
Yeah.
took horrendous casualties. 20,000 people have probably died meat assaulting through Sumy to no tangible benefit. So there's a lot that's going to be coming online. Ukraine is mastering this interceptor drone technology. These clips and videos I've seen of these little bullet drones, Ukraine's going to have a breakthrough, and they're going to make these Gurlan jet drones basically obsolete. In addition, with the investment coming from Germany, Ukraine's very close to having their own domestically produced ballistic missiles. No range restrictions inside of Russia. They can go 700 kilometers. This will hit the outer ring of Moscow if Ukraine wants to target it. So this is coming, and this is going to be a very bad initial week for the Russians, because nobody can tell Ukraine they can't do this. And we know Russia's not going to use a nuclear weapon. So we're just along for the ride until the Russian state collapses. Whether this is a mutiny, a civil war, an economic catastrophe, Putin can't keep doing this forever. He knows that. He knows that. Everyone's telling him that, but he's still pretending like he's going to get away with this. He personally doesn't see an alternative for himself, but Ukraine has to keep doing what they're doing, holding the line. We've been doing it 3.5 years. I don't see the Russians going past this winter. I don't think their economy can stand it anymore. I don't think the Russian people can stand it anymore. And we just need to achieve a breakthrough, a breaking point. Somebody has to choke out, knife Putin in the back, and then we can start negotiating with whoever replaces him.
I tend to agree that that's where it's heading. Putin will keep fighting until he really forces an immense systemic collapse in Russia. And I think you're right that that's coming in the next sort of 6 to 18 months, something in that kind of time frame. So the concluding idea here is activists need to really double down and support Ukraine, not get sucked into delusions and fantasies of this sort of fake peace. Europe needs to buckle down and abandon the consensus with Trump's US. And that's basically it. We just need to buckle down and fight. And there's no
I
other
will
way.
say, I will say one positive, Jonathan, because Trump is so stupid. He keeps talking about Ukraine. Like, people keep asking him, but he keeps promising a deadline, or he keeps promising he's going to do something. And even this meeting in Alaska, this is keeping the Ukraine war in the headlines. This is keeping it on the front page. Everybody is talking about it. That's a benefit to Ukraine. That's a benefit to people trying to raise awareness. If Trump 7 months ago had just said, we're done with Ukraine, we're cutting off all military aid, we're cutting off all intelligence sharing, we want nothing to do with it, and then he never spoke about it, Anytime a reporter said a hospital in Kyiv was just blown up, Trump could say, I'm not involved. It's not my business. I'm not going to talk about it. And then he could talk about other issues. So actually, he is kind of doing us, the information sphere, trying to promote what is happening in the war, trying to raise awareness. Shockingly, he actually is helping. I'm getting huge spikes in views across all my social media because this is what everyone's talking about this week. Trump's a narcissist and he wants the media spectacle on him and about him. Jonathan, this is no different than when Trump went to the DMZ to meet with Kim Jong-un. This was 2019. And Trump, he's such a narcissist. It kills him the fact that Barack Obama has a Nobel Peace Prize and he doesn't. So in 2019, he went to the DMZ to negotiate a lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula. And Kim Jong-un was like, okay, if you want to meet with me and talk to me, I don't have anything else to do. North Korea is the most isolated country in the world. So it was a nightmare. It was a disaster. Nothing came of it in 2019. And the same thing's going to happen if Putin and Trump actually meet. It'll be a stupid meeting that goes nowhere, raises a lot of attention, raises Trump and Putin's profiles, but no, nothing is going to end anytime soon. There is no deal to be had because the Russians are not negotiating a good faith.
And let's be real as well, we should not think that Trump will abandon Putin no matter what the sort of superficial changes of tone might be. We've seen a bit of roller coaster in language, but fundamentally, he's aligned with Putin. And of course, that wouldn't be the first time in his life that he's back to loser, and back to loser to see it go down in flames.
Yep, Trump loves Putin. He respects, Putin is the richest man in the world, which Trump thinks is amazing. Putin has been stealing the wealth of Russia for 26 years, and Trump respects that. The fact that Putin has been able to consolidate power, to imprison journalists, to kill opposition leaders, to throw people out windows, poison people, and he just keeps getting away with it. Trump looks up to Putin. Putin is his role model, and he desperately seeks Putin's friendship and approval and wants to be seen as his equal.
Yeah.
This is just how dictators think and feel. It's horrendous.
He sees the control that Putin leverages over his people, and there's a degree of longing, a degree of aspiration there, which is again what you're fighting against, and the awareness of resisting that. Jake, you're doing an absolutely tremendous job, and we're all blown away by the fundraisers, and I've seen what those vehicles do. As we talked last time, I've been to Slavyansk. I've seen how these things are put to use. I've met people whose lives were saved by them. So it's incredibly moving to see that. So thank you for all of that. And I just encourage people to just keep plugging on, keep fighting, keep resisting, and keep supporting Ukraine. And doing the democratic activist thing to help bring back the values which are temporarily suspended.
And I also appreciate what you do, Jonathan, in that you're willing to take the time and have a conversation with lesser known people. You have podcasts on your channel with just a couple thousand views because these people are not well known, but you are a historical archive. You're a historical record of the participants in this war supporting Ukraine. And that's what you do full time. I have a podcast, but I do maybe 3 a month. I'm just more focused on the war updates, but anytime somebody contacts me and says, hey, this person would be great, you should do a podcast episode with them, I always reference you, recommend you, because I know this is what you do full time, and you're really fantastic at it. Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Thank you, Jake. And for the record, there is quite a few fantastic interview guests which have come of recommendations. And not only have I enjoyed those conversations immensely, but I think they have some impact as well. Jake, it's a brilliant community to be part of. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. And I know everyone's very grateful for what you do.
Enjoy your time in DC and stay safe.